Welcome to Simplifying Remote Collaboration. In each episode, we'll discuss how the shift to hybrid working and learning has put growing pressure on IT departments to better support remote collaboration. At a time when resources are stretched thin by competing priorities, we'll explore ways to simplify the IT setup and management of hybrid spaces.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Simplifying Remote Collaboration. I'm your host for today, Ben Thomas. As our AV community continues to expand in newer and even in some cases non-traditional verticals, that has really changed some of the ways that we do business, not only from a channel perspective, but a project management perspective, also increasing stakeholder perspective. And what has happened is that as we've increased a lot of these stakeholders through different communities, there tends to be a knowledge gap between the technology implementation and execution side and some of those higher level conversations, whether it be executive boards, vice presidents, things like that. And one of the places that you see that a lot is in higher education, whether it's, making sure that we're creating workflows or enterprise spaces that can accomplish the goals of our educational institution, hit learning objectives, achieve things like DEI. Now the technology world has really come in and helped empower a lot of that. So I wanted to bring on somebody today who could really help bridge that gap and give us some practical advice and tips on some of the ways we could bridge the gap between the kind of the executive decision-making community and a lot of those technical installers and the technical decision-making community as well. And that's Britt Yenser, Director of Event Technology over at Moravian University. Britt, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Britt, wanted to ask first question, right? It's easy for me to come in and say that the channel has evolved, right? But you're someone who lives it every single day in a lot of cases. And even in a post-COVID world, things have just changed at such a rapid pace. In your perspective, how are some of the ways that you've seen, those extra voices coming in? What are some of the challenges that you've seen pop up?
Yeah, so I would say, and it's something that I say often, that hybrid or high flex was always coming, but the pandemic accelerated it. So I would say that is the largest change, and the conflicting voices that we're hearing in higher ed, because you have faculty who are invested in high flex, and there are faculty who want things to revert back to all in person, how things used to be, even though unfortunately for the people who want that does not seem to be what the reality is going to be. So there's the conflict.
Well, it's interesting you talk about high flex. That's kind of the perfect example, right? And for a long time, well, I'll just say on a higher level, remote or non-traditional learning, tools were kind of this pie in the sky. It'd be nice to have, we have some online tools, things like that. But then overnight, obviously, we had to make a pretty significant pivot. And you talked about some of those people on both sides really having to battle with that. But one of the challenges was it's cool to have an idea and say that you want to run it out. And it's totally different between the technology side having to actually execute on that. What are some of the challenges and even conflicts that popped up just from a communication standpoint?
Well, it was the obvious supply chain, because people don't necessarily understand that immediately. They started to understand it when it hit them at the consumer level. But when it first started to happen, it was unclear to some people, I think, why it was difficult to get the technology that we needed to implement. And honestly, just communicating the amount of time and amount of labor that the upgrades require. Sometimes people don't really understand that. When technology works well, you don't really notice. And so I don't think that people necessarily realize how much work is happening on the back end to make these things happen.
Well, you bring up a great point, right? You talk about whether it's actual function of technology or whether it's aligning with vision. A lot of times, especially now, I would almost say the initiation of the project looks a little bit different, right? Whereas it might have been a little bit more project-based or individual school-based. Now, a lot of times, whether it's high flex learning or whether it's larger initiatives, that comes from a little bit higher, right? So there's almost a little bit more insulation between the technology implementation team and that executive team. But one of the things you talk about, that I love as you're talking about online and things like that is you talk about, making sure we're achieving learning objectives or learning goals or serving the larger mission of the education community. How does the technology team loop in some of those higher level decision makers to actually make sure that not only are we building an incredible, tech stack, but actually achieving a lot of these goals?
Yeah, so we're fortunate at my university where there is a VP that represents the IT department. So our area is already represented at that table. And so we can tell our VP what our needs are, and then he can translate that. I do find it's helpful to, even when working with our VP, to communicate in less technical ways, so that he knows exactly how we need it explained. And so, it's kind of like two conversations at once. You can talk the talk with him and tell him all of the specs and the nitty gritty, and then also translate it and say, like, this is how I need it packaged when you take it to the table.
Britt, you talked a little bit about kind of the chain of command that you guys have from an event side, but if you would break it down just a little bit deeper, how typically do you guys see projects come down from, even an ideation standpoint to a budgeting to, at the end of the day, execution standpoint? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so I would describe that as being almost circular until it reaches a completion. So, you have the people at the top who say, we have this vision, and then it comes down to us, and we determine how we feel that vision should be executed, and it goes back to them, and they say yes, no, maybe, whatever. They send their questions back to us, and it's kind of this constant communications loop until ultimately what we, as the boots on the ground, say we feel is the best solution at the best price, is normally ultimately what they accept at the top.
Well, and I want to ask too, especially a little bit more on maybe the ideation and maybe the budgeting and kind of that pre-execution side. What are some of the differences and challenges that you're seeing pop up on that side, right? And obviously, it would be we'd be living in an ideal world where we got an exact budget, exact outcomes, but the reality is that's not always that case. What does that process and project management process look like, and has it changed a little bit?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely challenging. I think that a lot of institutions right now are experiencing budget cuts and needing to tighten the belt, so to speak. And for me, it really comes down to being creative with things. So, what do I already have at my disposal that I might be able to use in a different or unique way? Maybe this was not its intended purpose. I think meeting owls are a great example of that, right? Like, the intended purpose of a meeting owl is to sit in a conference room always. But if you need to Zoom in a performance hall that has absolutely nothing in it, then maybe I'm just going to drop in this owl, because it's going to do what you need it to do. So getting creative with your limited resources.
Well, it's funny too, really the point that you bring up is simplicity, right? I think as a technology world, I hate to say this, but it's the reality of us. We like to at times overcomplicate things. We like to kind of have things, we like to be the person who knows how to fix things. But you talk about whether it's the meeting owl or whether it's, an all-in-one solution or even something that's just very, very simple, whether it be an iPad or whatever. Talk about how the role of simplicity has actually helped bridge that gap a little bit, because even some of the technical challenges that may have existed before, whether it be signal flow, whether it be hardware, some of those might not actually exist because we're looking at simplifying some of these solutions. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely budget friendly. It's definitely helpful if you're like me and you rely a lot on student employees in higher ed. The simpler of a solution that you can come up with so that it's easy for a student technician to implement, that will make everyone's lives more successful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's kind of the role of really that insulator, right? That person who can communicate a lot of those. And it's interesting to look, and obviously it's happening in education, but it's happening in enterprise spaces as well, where, there a lot of times isn't that middleman, right? There might not be an integrator for a lot of these projects because the channel looks a little bit different. So there might not always be that insulator between maybe the subject matter expert and that higher level kind of decision-making staff. What do you recommend, and what are some of the things that you've seen be effective for those who may not have that insulator?
Well, I would say, especially in the higher education vertical, it's important that all departments are aligned with the university or college's mission in some way. I think that you should be able to stop any employee on a campus and ask them what their mission statement is for the university, and they should be able to tell you. And, because you are all, at the end of the day, on one team with one primary goal for your institution, and then just finding ways to align your particular work with the larger work of your institution. And when you have that in mind and you're able to see, this is the large mission, this is how I fit into it and how my work fits into it, that makes that conversation much easier.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of stick on that student facing side a little bit. Obviously one of the major goals of a higher education institution, or any educational institution for that matter, is to achieve learning outcomes, right? Is to successfully communicate and teach students at their best level. I want to ask about that feedback loop, right? At the end of the day, as much as we want to, pretend like we've always got our finger on the pulse of everything, how do we act as that feedback loop, maybe to help connect the dots between some of those students who may or may not be enjoying specific technologies and some of that upper level management style?
That's a good question. So, are you thinking more the academic side, social side? Because
Specifically, so for example, if I'm a student, right, who's leveraging a new piece of technology, whether it's bring your own device, whether it's a setup in a meeting room, so specifically probably more on the student and academic side, sourcing feedback obviously is a massive part of that, right, to help achieve those learning outcomes. How do you help bridge the gap as somebody who's regularly involved in those technology decisions between, the student and the user and that upper level side?
yeah, so we gather feedback as we can, and a lot of the feedback, I would honestly say, comes more from the faculty than the students. Our students, we are an Apple distinguished school, so they all have their MacBooks and iPads, and they're comfortable with that use. And being a primarily Apple product campus, we have Apple TVs all over the place, which is really more of a consumer level device. So that makes it difficult to manage on our end, but easy for the students to use. So we don't get many complaints or concerns on the student end. But any feedback that we do get, we kind of metabolize it and figure out what is really worth taking up the chain. Like, is this a true issue? Does this really need to be fixed? Because that's important. You have to determine what is at the core of this feedback. Is it that the technology is not user friendly and they need training, or it's not user friendly and like just throw it away and try again to make it easier? And if we're throwing it away, well, now we need money and resources and we have to take that up the chain, So just trying to figure out what exactly is needed to fix this.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, right? There is, I'll get a chuckle from the hardware community in AV, but it's funny sometimes. Like I mentioned, we do have a tendency to overcomplicate things and make things work how we would prefer them to work. But sometimes it's as simple as putting an Apple TV, putting an all-in-one speaker, soundbar, microphone in the room that really can take it to the next level, right? And when you think about not only the learning objectives, right, but maybe some of the challenges, whether it be accessibility, whether it's ADA compliance, or whether it's aligning with DEI initiatives of the university, things like that. How do you help represent that from a technology side? Because we're often the ones who have the most knowledge about specific products, specific workflows, things like that. How do you help act as a liaison between that?
Yeah, so in my particular role as director of event technology, I often am actively interfacing with various groups across campus. Anyone who is looking to host an event and have it supplemented with AV, then I'm in that conversation from the ground floor to discuss what it is they're looking to do. And so it just becomes a constant translation of, you want to show something on a screen. Okay, now I translate that to there's projection in that space, or that should be a TV, or what is it? So just like getting to understand what it is people want to accomplish, and then translating that to the technology that they need. And oftentimes, I don't necessarily share that translation with them. I keep things very non-technical, like, oh, you want to show something, you want to play music, you want to show a video, you want people who are online to talk back at you. Okay, got it. You don't need to know all the pieces and parts I'm putting in to make that happen.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, honestly, right? I think that going along with our tendency to overcomplicate things, we have a tendency to say, oh, well, this has to go into this, and this feed has to go back into this. Oh, and then we've got to run a mic, and at the end of the day, we're there to help serve our end user community, and I love hearing your perspective, and whether it's a consumer device, whether it's kind of keeping some of the high level stuff away from. I love hearing about that execution style, and as somebody who obviously has been in higher ed for a while, I love to hear that and see how the vision of serving your communities, whether it's serving those who are attending an event, whether it's serving students, serving the faculty as well. I love to see that vision. I love to see that you're focused so heavily on that. And I'll wrap it up kind of with this question. What are some of the things that you would like to see maybe in the next generation as we specifically next generation of technology, where we're looking, at an evolving channel, right? Would you like to see more involvement from hardware partners? Would you like to see more training materials? Would you like to see maybe more training even on the technology side on how to help best communicate some of these best practices? What are some of the things that you would ideally love to see?
I do think that in a lot of ways, we are moving away from hardware and more into a software-based world, especially given how much students enjoy being online and having virtual experiences. So I would actually like to see more user-friendly software and better training experiences with that, because there are some major software video conferencing companies that it just does not immediately feel user friendly, especially as you're reading their directions and stuff. I know there are certain platforms we've gotten very used to and we just assume, sure, everyone knows how to do that. But those same platforms are constantly undergoing updates, and the documentation on their websites are not always clear. So I would just like for that world to get a little bit smoother, because I do think that students prefer that world.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I love really breaking down some of these discussions with you. And I'll ask this final question, right? As we continue to bring people into our little community of AV tweeps and AV people just in general, and as we expand as a group of technology, I hate to say the word nerds. It's killing me not to say the word nerds, but we're just technology-minded folks. As we continue to expand, what's some advice that you have for those people who may be wanting to get into, academia and higher education and really elevate their technical skills to help teach and educate and train?
I think it really depends on the person. I mean, for me, I'm a person who learns by doing. So my immediate advice is just go do it. just jump in and give it a try, because that's how I learn. I don't think I really understand something fully until I get my hands on it. So I guess to be authentic to how I learn, that would be my advice, is to just, give it a try. And especially if you already have a different AV background, if you understand the tech and you just want to break into higher ed, you have the knowledge base already there. So just give it a try, and give it a try with an open heart. Higher ed is a very special vertical, and, we're doing more than just providing pieces and parts. We're contributing to people's education. We're contributing to people's social experience. A lot of people have very fond memories and experiences from their college experience, and that's something that you'd be contributing to. So you have to put some heart into it as well.
Well, Britt, we appreciate you coming on the show today. Hope to have you on soon, but it's been so great to have you on, and looking forward to hearing more from you in the future.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.